Okay, hi everyone. For those watching online, I am calling this meeting of the Standing Committee on Government Operations to order. Good afternoon. My name is Julian Morse. I'm the MLA for Frame Lake and chair of this committee. Today's meeting is public and being live streamed on the Assembly's social media channels. So hello to everyone tuning in. Before we continue, I would like to remind everyone, in particular our presenter, that we have a person in the audio-visual booth controlling the cameras and microphones. So just when we get to the question and answer period, Mr. Thayer, just wait for me to acknowledge you before you start speaking. It just helps our audio-visual go smoothly. I will now ask members to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, Mr. Thayer. My name is Denny Rogers. I'm the MLA for Nuvik-Boot Lake.
Hello, my name is Jane Wayellen Armstrong, MLA for Mofi, Klitschko region. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll go online. I believe we have Mr. Hawkins online.
No.
Oh,
He's left.
okay. We did have him. So this afternoon, as part of its study of the Northwest Territory Power Corporation's governance structure, we welcome Curtis Thayer, Executive Director of the Alaska Energy Authority. Thank you so much for joining us. Please proceed with your presentation, and we'll open to the floor to questions from MLAs after you're done. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And I do apologize. Tim Sandstrom was supposed to be on with me, but he had a family emergency this morning, so I'm pitch hitting his section too. But excuse me. If I could have the next slide, please. A little bit about the Alaska Energy Authority. We are a state-owned corporation. We have a appointed board of directors of 8 people, 2 members of the governor's cabinet, 6 members of the public. And the public members have expertise, whether it be in what we call rural Alaska programs or rail belt, is what we call our large transmission grid, engineering, financing energy projects. So it's a pretty diverse board. And our mission is to reduce the cost of energy in Alaska. And with that, we break ourselves down into 7 different groups. We have what we call the rail belt energy or owned assets. And with that, we have several assets that we own. We own the state's largest hydro facility, Bradley Lake outside of Homer. It actually provides 10% of all the renewable energy, on the rail belt, which includes all the way from Homer into Anchorage, all the way to Fairbanks, about a 600-mile long grid. Along with that, we own the Alaska Intertie, which is a 170-mile section of that 600 miles. In addition, Sterling to Quartz Creek, which is another 40 miles. So of the 600-mile transmission line, we own 210 miles of it. And then we are currently in the process of doing what we call an HVDC, direct current transmission line, going from the Kenai Peninsula across what we call Cook Inlet. And that's a $413 million project, which will give us redundancy and 2 lines off the Kenai Peninsula, serving the largest south central region being Anchorage and the Mat-Su Valley all the way to Fairbanks. And then we have what we call renewable energy and energy efficiencies. We have a team of people looking at and responsible for large grants and projects, whether it be biomass, electric vehicles, also the federal programs, the Solar for All and the home energy and energy rebate allocations. Their group is responsible for about $400 million worth of projects. And then we have grants and loans. We have our own what we call Renewable Energy Fund, which I'll talk a little bit later about, but is to help fund projects to get them off the ground with renewable energy, especially in rural Alaska. 80% of our funding, or 80% of the funding for that program goes to rural Alaska. And then we also have a power project fund. We also have a loan fund that we provide patient capital to projects that maybe not quite meet bank financing, but needs to take it to that next level. We have loans out on that, and that actually has been very successful. And one of the ways we measure success is we've never had a default on the program. So these have been good projects. They just need to get to that next step. We also do energy planning. The governor had us do an Alaska Energy Security Task Force. We completed that last December, and we've seen a lot of the recommendations. 60 recommendations came out of that, not only looking at urban Alaska, but rural Alaska and the coastal Alaska. And we had 60 recommendations come out of that, and the legislature and the governor has been very active in implementing those. We also have an electronic data library. The AEA has literally spent hundreds of millions of dollars on energy projects in Alaska. And so we've created a data library that all that is public facing. For the most part, there are some stuff I will say are confidential, like our plans for powerhouses, and obviously for Dixon, for Bradley Lake, we don't share the powerhouse details on that, but for the most part, everything is public. And then we also have some federal programs that we run out of that. We also have what we call the Rail Belt Transmission Organization. And as I mentioned that we own 210 miles of the 600-mile transmission line, the governor and the legislature passed legislation that we're putting together an open access transmission line for that 600 miles. You have 4 other utilities plus AEA, so you have 5 owners owning different sections of it. And of course, there's wheeling rates or pancaking of rates. And so the goal is to get rid of that and go under a postage rate stamp, whether you're sitting next to Bradley Lake or you're all the way in Fairbanks, and that we can manage that to help us bring on more renewables onto that and know what that cost is. And then the 2 areas I'll focus on particularly that I was asked to was the Power Cost Equalization Program. It's a program that we spend $48 million a year for 188 rural communities, and it affects 82,000 Alaskans. And so we'll discuss that program. And then with rural energy, we do bulk fuel upgrades and rural power system upgrades, primarily in rural villages. We also have what we call a circuit rider program, and then we do respond to electrical emergencies in rural Alaska. And when I say rural Alaska is when the lights go out in a community of 100 people, we tend to be their 911 call. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, great, thanks. This is just a snapshot of the different projects that we have, whether this captures not only our circuit riders, but our power cost equalization program, where we have renewable energy fund projects. And then you kind of see in that center of the state there, that blue line, that's the transmission line, and where the hydro projects are. But it just kind of gives us a good snapshot of everything that we're doing. And plus, we do a lot of training in rural Alaska in these small communities. Next slide. We'll step into rural energy. And then the next slide, there should be a video, I believe, that should be all queued up.
In rural Alaska, the lights stay on because of operators, mechanics, linemen, clerks, managers, and the Alaska Energy Authority. This partnership supports critical energy infrastructure throughout rural Alaska. Using state-of-the-art reality capture with ArcGIS mapping technologies, AEA has assessed the condition of 190 powerhouses, 292 tank farms, and in an ongoing assessment of distribution systems, 32 communities have been visited and analyzed. AEA uses this data to prioritize urgent needs, guiding limited resources where they're needed most. Bulk fuel storage is vital for heating, transportation, and electricity in rural Alaska, where tank farms are often neighbors to entire communities. Many of these facilities are aging, with deferred maintenance costs exceeding $1 billion. AEA's bulk fuel upgrade program ensures safe and efficient fuel storage, extending the life of tank farms, upgrading equipment, and in some cases replacing entire facilities that date back over 60 years. Fuel, barged or flown into remote areas, is stored and consumed to power these communities. Alaska's rural diesel powerhouses generate electricity for entire villages. Operators ensure control systems, generators, cooling systems, renewable integrations, and increasingly complex systems are efficiently maintained. Through the Rural Power Systems Upgrade Program, AEA has improved quality of life statewide by funding projects from basic repairs to entirely new powerhouses. Delivering electricity in Alaska's extreme conditions requires robust distribution networks from poles to transformers to meters. AEA's Rural Power Systems Upgrade Program plans, troubleshoots, and manages projects that ensure the distribution networks are working efficiently. No one knows Alaska's rural energy infrastructure better than AEA's circuit riders, a dedicated team of technicians and trainers who are often the first responders to communities confronting large or small power issues. In the past 5 years, they've helped restore power to 20 communities during emergencies, provided rural communities remote technical assistance in more than 2,000 instances, delivered on-site technical assistance and training to communities on more than 400 occasions, enabled more than 180 rural Alaskans to attend and complete coursework in bulk fuel operations, power plant operations, or person-in-charge training at the Alaska Vocational Technical Center. Alaska Energy Authority, supporting the people and projects that keep the lights on in rural Alaska.
All right, thank you. Next slide. That was just kind of a background of what our work is in rural Alaska. And when we say rural Alaska, those 188 communities, they are small microgrids unto themselves, less than 2,000 people. A lot of them are just a couple hundred people. And their cost of energy is primarily, or there is diesel powerhouses. We do wind and solar irrigation and hydro when we can, but really in rural Alaska, just like in Canada, in some of those areas, they like to keep the lights on at 30 below, and that's diesel powerhouses. And we're displacing diesel, but we're not replacing diesel in a lot of these communities. And so Alaska kind of faced this issue on urban rural energy solutions. And back in 1960, Alaska was just become a state. And it goes back into rural Alaska and looking at what needs to be done for investments. And oil prices were rising, oil was discovered, Alaska had funding. And so really that's where we had started what at that time was a lifeline to rural Alaska. And in the 1980s, when Alaska used oil revenue to develop energy infrastructure, and that's where Bradley Lake was built by the state. It's owned by Alaska Energy Authority, but it was built by the state. Transmission lines were built by the state. We own and we operate them, as far as AEA does. But in rural Alaska, that infrastructure investment was extremely high. And so what we did is in 1994 is they created the Power Cost Equalization Program, and that was to align rural electric rates with urban centers. And so we look at the cost of Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau. It's roughly 20 cents a kilowatt. And so that establishes a floor for the Power Cost Equalization Program. And anything up to 75 cents a kilowatt, this Power Cost Equalization Program pays that difference. So if the cost in a community is 40 cents a kilowatt, 20 cents the state of Alaska is going to subsidize through the PCE program. If it's over 75 cents, that's our cap. And the floor is done by a regulation through our Regulatory Commission of Alaska. And so if the cost in those three primary regions drop, say it gets to 18 cents, then that becomes the new floor. So if the rate's lower in urban Alaska, it's a benefit to the program in rural Alaska. Next slide. This was just a slide that we put the legislative evolution on here. You know, it took many years, and but the program just slowly improved. Back in 1991, we called it the Power Production Cost Assistance Program, and we changed the name in FY22, and then FY 1994-95 time period is when we actually had the PCE program. And then we looked for funding into the program into the 90s. And one of the things I think is important to note with the PCE is the state has put money into an endowment. That endowment right now stands at almost $1 billion. So the funding for this program is actually from the earnings of that endowment. So it does not come out of the budget in a normal legislative session in the sense that the source of the funds are identified. It's not coming out of what we call unrestricted general funds. Next slide. The PCE disbursements in millions, this just gives you an idea of roughly how much we have paid out of the PCE program for the last 24 years. You'll see the increase in FY23 and 24, and the reason that increase is there is the program used to cover the first 500 kilowatts of residential power, and it was changed to 750 kilowatts, and so we're seeing obviously an increase in the usage and the amount of funds going out. And the fund is roughly $48 million, or our budget for this program is roughly $48 million in a calendar year. And next slide, please. The endowment that funds it, you can see it was less than $200 million just 20 years ago, and the state has continually put money into the program and has not recently as it's become self-sustaining. But roughly the fund stands at a little less than $1 billion. It's managed by our permanent fund corporation who manages our sovereign wealth fund of $80 billion. And so it is tucked in with them. And then the interest earned is then given back, obviously, through the Power Cost Equalization Program at $48 million. If there's additional funding beyond that, we do what we call community assistance, which is primarily to help rural Alaska. That's another $30 million. And if there's funding beyond that, then we look at doing powerhouse upgrades, renewable energy fund, helping with loans result from bulk fuel. Again, that's kind of what we call the cascade or the waterfall. That doesn't happen every year, but it's kind of a bonus when it does happen, when the PCE program earns enough money, and the fact it's a 5-year look back also. So it's an averaging effect on it. Next slide. Who's eligible to participate? I kind of mentioned that. But residential and community facilities, water, sewer, public lighting, clinics, residential, who's not eligible is state and federal facilities or commercial customers, or any community with rates that are lower than Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau, which we do have some. And so when you look at this map and it's broken down by different regions, when you look at the center of the state where it says rail belt, you'll see that there is no PCE communities. And the reason for that is they're connected to the state's transmission system and they're connected by road. Therefore, they do not qualify for PCE. And other parts of the state, the blue triangles represents those communities. And when you see that, we have no roads. They're all microgrids across the state, all the way down to the Aleutian Islands. And when you look at this, they're all primarily diesel generated. But if you're in Southeast Alaska or Kodiak or Bristol Bay, you probably have access to hydro. And we've been promoting hydro and actually have loans out with some hydro facilities. But the more northern you get, the more challenging it becomes. The wind doesn't always blow. We all know the sun doesn't shine for, at least in some areas of Alaska, for 90 days in the wintertime. And there's no biomass. We don't have trees. So it is a challenge. And so that's where the diesel powerhouses are kind of the backbone in rural Alaska. Next slide. The program today, I mentioned it's 188 communities. There's 82 electrical utilities, small electrical utilities. And we've discussed this at 750 kilowatts. The public facilities is limited to 70 megawatts. But if there's a community washateria, health clinic, something along those lines owned by the community, then we will help pay those costs. And we do pay them they submit their reports to us. We audit them, and then we reimburse within 30 days a check back to the utility to help offset those costs in the community. Next slide. Powerhouses, this is another one of our challenges here because the cost of replacing powerhouses in rural Alaska is a lot more than we have funding for. Obviously, the upper picture is actually in Tulusac, Alaska, and that is obviously a generator or a set of generators that we do not like to see. In the front of the picture there's a generator missing, so that's always a challenge. But the after picture is what we hope to do. We build buildings here in South Central Alaska They're 14 by 46 feet long. We put 3 to 4 generators in them and ship them as a package into rural Alaska. And that becomes the community's power source again for hopefully up to 20 years. And where we know and where we can, we do the switchgear to integrate renewables on those systems. But the deferred maintenance on this is almost $300 million. It's just the number of communities versus the amount of replacement. We're kind of always falling behind the power curve. Next slide. This is a rural power system upgrade list. We have the 188, but we do a kind of a top 25. The average powerhouse is $6 million. And so just this list of 25 represents $175 million. This list will change because as communities are possibly able to self-fund, or depending on emergencies for certain communities, this list might move around. But we do provide to our state legislature this list every year so they know what communities in what order are priorities for us. Next slide. We do the same thing for our bulk fuel upgrades. Obviously, the one above in Russian Mission is not what we like to see for a tank farm, and that is actually being replaced. And then down below in the after section is what we hope those to grow or hope those to build. But again, our cost with that is $11 million a bulk fuel facility, and so it's almost $800 million of deferred. It's almost $1 billion of deferred maintenance just in those. And so it is something that in this aging infrastructure is 60 years old. Some of these are left over, these tanks being used are left over from the military. And so, again, it is a challenge. There are some other funding sources with this that we work with on the federal side to match state dollars. Next slide. We do the same thing with a bulk fuel upgrade priority list. It is not the same list as the powerhouses because sometimes the powerhouses are in good condition where the bulk fuel is in not the best condition or vice versa. And this goes back to in the video when we talked about doing 3D modeling and actually going out to these villages and capturing this in real time for powerhouses and for bulk fuel. It actually saves us money because then when we have, let's just look at number 10, Wales, Alaska, we can actually send that to an engineer, all the 3D modeling on that. It saves time, saves money from them actually have to visit the community to get some initial estimates and moving projects forward. But again, it's a healthy list of projects, and this again is just the top 25. And next slide. Our circuit rider program, I think, is fairly unique. We have 4 gentlemen that travel to rural Alaska, and primarily they do a lot of on-site training in powerhouses and bulk fuel. And they also do remote assistance where we can, with the 3D modeling, now we can do it via the internet as far as trying to look at communities. This is not the 188 communities, which is a good thing, but when you see a number next to these communities, you can see that some are what we would call frequent flyers. They tend to have more problems in their villages, and part of that reason is for lack of training, or it could be the powerhouse, or it could be bulk fuel. But definitely, we would not like to see any communities on here, but we do have those 4 gentlemen, and they've made an average of 30 to 40 trips a year into rural Alaska. Now, some of these communities have a larger utility that are tied with them, a nonprofit co-op. But there's about 45 communities that we are their 911 call. So they're not tied with utility, and if the power goes out, then they call us. And an average, depending on it, an average cost in rural Alaska is $50,000 to $100,000 if we have to respond to an electrical emergency. Next slide is a kind of a unique program we have is the Renewable Energy Fund. Go to the next slide. The state of Alaska in 2008 created this these grants that are subject to legislative approval. There's an advisory committee that recommends them, but we take out, AEA takes applications. We rank those applications by the technology, the cost of power, the savings in power, their location, the type of technology it is, and we develop this list, and this Renewable Energy Advisory Committee reviews it. They rank them. The governor is given to the governor. The governor, puts money in the budget, and it's generally not the full amount, just because in this particular year we have a $21 million ask. The governor was able to put $6.2 million in the budget for these projects. We do rounds, so to speak. And in the last 4 years, the rounds have been almost $45 million. So if we do $6 million this year, it'll be $50 million going into this renewable energy fund. Next slide. And so this one is the recommendations to our Alaska legislature from AEA through the governor's office. And so where you see the 1 through 6 and you see that orange line, there's funding for everything above the orange line, and there's not funding available for anything below the orange line. It's not being critical of the project. It's just how much money is available to us to move this program forward. But this program alone has saved 100 million gallons of diesel since its inception. So in less than 20 years, that's quite a savings to have, because we're able to move it primarily into renewables. We're seeing a lot more battery integration that we're helping funding. And then there's a lot of this funding, a lot of these projects that got the go-ahead or the initial money from us that have now applied for private money or federal dollars, and they have received almost $300 million in that. It's almost been a one-on-one match. And so this program is very unique compared to other states, but it is also one that has been very successful. And again, it's just limited by what our capital budget happens to be. In a robust capital year, there's more funding available to it. When it's not as robust, then this program is reduced, as other programs are. Next slide. Just to touch base, this just happens to be with us on our federal awards. We've just come off 4 years of President Biden, and with President Biden, there's been a lot of funding available to AEA. We currently have $538 million we received from the federal government. Some of it does require a match of $216 million. So, with the matches, we're looking at close to $800 million or 600. And then when we look at some bonding that we have done to do some match, and then we have applications funding are pending. The one thing I think it's important to note is when we talk about the Biden money and what we call IIJ, the infrastructure and all that, none of that funding rural Alaska powerhouses or bulk fuel qualified for, because it was fossil fuel. And so probably our most needed section of our population living in rural Alaska in extreme temperatures, they didn't qualify to replace a powerhouse or a bulk fuel tank with any of this federal dollars. And so that's why that one is particularly challenging to us. But I just wanted to kind of touch base on our funding sources. Not only do we receive money from the state, but we also get money from the federal, and then we also can get money from the private sector. And we do have people that have donated into certain projects into what we do in rural Alaska, especially. Next slide. When you look at everything that AEA does, this is the team. We're going to be staffing up about 20 people with our work that we have with the GRIP, that HVDC line going across Cook Inlet. But this is a team. We're a pretty small operation people-wise, but currently we have $1 billion of capital projects that we're working on. But I'm open to any questions. I've tried to cover a lot in a short period of time, so I'm wide open.
Okay, thank you so much. That was brief and certainly, man, just looking at that map with all the triangles on it, I have so many questions personally, but I'm just here to chair. Committee members, who wants to ask some questions? Mr. Rogers, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. Certainly a lot of the challenges you face, we likely face as well. My region's in the Arctic and Nunavik, so understand some of the issues facing the smaller communities. I guess first, just from curiosity, what kind of usage, your average usage, I guess, in one of your smaller communities, one of your smaller villages, and your microgrids? What are you looking at there for consumption per community? Thank you.
To be honest with you, I don't have that off the top of my head, but we can provide it, because one of the things that we do is we provide to the legislature, and that is a usage by utility and by community. We do what we call a PCE report, so we can zero down into any of them. Actually, give me a second. Let me pull the report. Hang on one second. It varies greatly depending on where a particular community is listed or is at. But what exactly would you? I'm saying, what number would you like me to zero in? And I can do kilowatt by customer, by community facilities, overall. What would you like?
Mr. Rogers?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking at like per community, megawatt usage per community, and I ask because I look at one, I see in Naknek, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, you had 3.1 million in solar going in there, and I'm wondering if that is tying into the powerhouse you have there, or if that's kind of a one-off. And so if you take that community, for example, what would be and I'm not sure the size of, if that's an average size community, what kind of the total usage, I guess, the total output for your powerhouse for that community?
Right. That particular community, I'm looking at it, and the PCE eligible kilowatts is 2,713,000. The community's 122 people, and the average consumer, I'm just looking here. The average PCE eligible per kilowatt, the customers there use an average of 230. So this is one of those communities where this is their PCE statistics, and so where if they have solar and wind in the community, then that is offsetting that. And we've paid, and just in PCE payments to help offset their cost, was $898,000 US. Now that one is 822 folks, so that's a much larger community than majority of them. I'll use like Shululak, they're 100. It's 100 people, and their total PCE usage is 208,637, with their PCE payments being 90,000. So we have all that information, because one thing we look at is not only the diesel usage, but if there's non-diesel generated power. Like in this community, there isn't, but in Naknek on the schedule, let me just get back to Naknek. Naknek has, actually, this particular report is 22-23, does not have non-diesel generated, so this is not being recorded at this time in that report. But again, this is running a couple of years old, or a look back. But we can pull that for any community.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Rogers, you got another one?
Thank you. Yeah, and then those communities obviously are primarily all on diesel. And I guess, do you have, I've got a ton of questions I can ask, but do you have situations in some communities where residents themselves, individuals, have installed solar or wind, probably likely mainly solar for summer up there, where they can actually feed back into the grid, or is that something that is offered in the state? Feedback credits into the grid to, when the sun is shining, so to speak, right?
We're seeing more of the we call net metering back on the rail belt grid as far as the larger urban communities between Anchorage and Fairbanks. We're not seeing that in rural Alaska as much, because also in rural Alaska, some of these communities, the majority of these communities are below the poverty level, so they don't necessarily have the resources to do it. And so what we've done, and we'll be introducing into some communities, is community solar, where AEA we're providing solar that would help offset, but we're calling it community solar. We're also working with our Alaska Housing partners, another state corporation, for them to provide low-income solar on certain homes. But again, in rural Alaska, it's just difficult because you have 188 communities across the state. But on an individual basis, they generally don't do it in their individual homes. That's more happening in urban Alaska.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rogers, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I'll stop. Just one small follow-up. On your net metering in your larger areas, in your areas and your rail bed, do you cap that net metering? Thank you.
We cap it at the avoided cost of what natural gas is. So our primary 80% of the rail belt uses natural gas. And so whatever that cost is, that avoided cost, it comes in under that amount. We are working on a piece of legislation the governor's introduced at trying to incentivize people to increase their solar. But again, if it's wind or it happens to be a small hydro project in somebody's backyard, but able to put that back on the grid. And we're working with the utilities on it because there's also a cost. There's some costs associated with that. So we're trying to work through some legislation to encourage more people to do the net metering program. But again, it's at its very infancy stages.
Okay, thank you for that. Other members of the committee have questions for Mr. Thayer. Ms. Whalen Armstrong. Kate, do you want to be on this?
Thank you for the presentation. Circuit Rider Program, Electrical Emergency Assistance. If he can elaborate a little bit more on that, I would like to know what that means, Electrical Emergency Assistance for two communities. I'm not too sure if that's two of the communities that's close to the coast, to the ocean. If he can elaborate a little bit more on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Thayer.
Thank you. What we call the Circuit Rider Program, but what we do is we have four gentlemen that are not expertise, but obviously background electrical or diesel generation. And primarily what they do is travel to rural Alaska to assist communities if they have power emergencies where they're out of power and they need somebody on site. And with that also, we do training, not only on powerhouses, but bulk fuel and person in charge training, as we call it, for utility operators. And then at the same time, we keep spare parts, filters, stuff like that they might need. So if there's an issue where they're having a problem, and with our 3D modeling and what we've already assessed in those communities, we can help drill down to see what the problem is. And if we have parts or something where we can send out there, we want to do that before we send somebody. But if a community is actually in the dark and they have a problem with their powerhouse or something like that, that we will dispatch these people by charter aircraft to land and go out there and resolve the problem. Granted, it's an expensive fix, so our whole goal is to help provide the training ahead of time so we don't have these crises, especially when we have a crisis. It always happens in the wintertime on the coldest day or the stormiest night. But those are what the four gentlemen do, is they are we drop them into communities to help resolve problems.
Okay, sounds like the Mounties of the days of yore. Ms. Whalen Armstrong, did you have another one?
Yeah,
okay, Ms. Reed, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I'm sorry I was not here when you were first introduced. Member for Great Slave here in Yellowknife. I'm curious about the, I'm trying to get the name of the program right, perhaps I won't. But you do have the Renewable Energy Fund grant program. Does that also include components of battery storage for communities? Do you fund upgrades to those kinds of requirements for communities across the state? Thank you.
Go ahead.
The answer is yes. It has to be used for a component of renewable. There's a cap on the size of the project because we don't want to be subsidizing or giving grants to large companies. But it's for wind, solar, hydro, batteries, including, we've actually did a methane at a garbage dump for natural gas. And so we've pretty much across the board. We have over 100 active projects, and we have 56 in development, primarily from the funding from the last few years. And, for example, one of the projects in Southeast Alaska started as what we call started as a REP program, and it's a hydro facility that's 5 megawatts. That's taken that community 100% renewable. We started with that. Then we lent money on through our PPF, our Project Power Fund, and we still own the note on that. But for that particular community, they're 100% renewable, and it all started with the REF program. So we've seen some great successes with it, but we're looking at looking at whatever technology is available.
Thank you. Ms. Reid?
Thank you. And thank you for that answer. So just at a point of clarity, does the Renewable Energy Fund also come out of the coffers of the endowment that you have for the PCE program? Thank you.
No, it does not. There is a clause that when we have the earnings of the permanent fund, we have the earnings of the endowment, and then it goes into the PCE program, and then it goes into community assistance into rural Alaska. Depending on the earnings, if there's enough, then up to $25 million can go into the renewable or go into the REF program. But it's not automatic. That one is only if the funding will sustain, the earnings sustain that. Generally, the funding for the Renewable Energy Fund has come directly from the state. Now, I will mention that the state has added 2 provisions, and that is obviously the state is pursuing a natural gas pipeline from the North Slope down, and the state in statute has put 20% of any profit or earnings the state receives would go into the Renewable Energy Fund. So if that project makes $100 million a year, we get 20 million of it. If it makes $1, we get 20 cents. So again, that's not money that we're seeing realized. And then also Alaska did a carbon capture bill, primarily with our forests and our lands. And again, 20% of earnings from the state of Alaska would receive, 20% of it would go into the Renewable Energy Fund. Again, they're in the process of selling. We haven't seen the revenue source. So the state has looked at different ways to help augment and add to the Renewable Energy Fund that does not come out of the state's general budget, and obviously does not come out of the PCE, because the rural legislators are very protective of that $1 billion, as you can imagine.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Reid, go ahead for another one.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that answer. Yeah, no, I have a comment, but maybe just sort of a conversation point for you, and I don't expect an answer necessarily, but just listening to your presentation and looking at all the details from your slides, it's really, remarkable, the scale and opportunity that rural Alaska has thanks to that endowment fund, and obviously also to the structure of how the Alaska Energy Authority is working to make sure that money persists. Could you maybe speak a little bit to the governance of the authority and how that really enmeshes with how you're able to support smaller communities, and what improvements you would like to see possibly if legislators were amenable, or if there are any issues that you have within your organization that you would like to see addressed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think Alaska Energy Authority is unique in the sense that we have a board of directors that governs us, and they're appointed by the governor. But again, as I said, there were 2 that are in the governor's cabinet and 6 that are public members. And so with that, when we go to our state capitol, when we talk to our legislators, it's coming from a board perspective, because our board sets our priorities, our board sets our goals. And so it's not that we're, and I don't mean this in disrespect to a state agency or something, but we don't necessarily work through the governor's office. We work with the governor's office, but we have our own board that we report to. And so it's a board request when we go to Juneau. It's been vetted by a board of directors with expertise. And so it's not having a particular agency doing it, but you have a board. And with us overall, our book value actually is $1.7 billion as a corporation. So we're fairly large in that regard. When you look at state corporations, we're the third largest state corporation. We're actually larger than the Alaska Railroad, which everybody sees because they run trains, and we're larger than them, and we're quiet and behind the scenes. So I think it's kind of our unique structure, and so that structure also allows us to do stuff that normally would be caught up in a bureaucracy of government. Not saying we don't have bureaucracy, but we do able to peel that back a lot easier than if we were reporting to a governor or to the legislature on everything that we did.
I do have to admit, when I saw the photo of your team compared against the amount of money you guys are moving around, I was a little bit shocked. Just being a person that is, we have quite a large bureaucracy here in the Northwest Territories.
If I could add, if I could just add to something, and that is what's also unique to us is none of our employees we're all exempt. We don't have unions in our particular agency. And the other aspect too is we do a lot of our work by contract, because we've just found it a lot more efficient to contract and manage what our projects are, as opposed to do them in-house with government employees, or I should say, that's where I think the bureaucracy gets is a little bit, and so we have that flexibility of working with private contractors on a lot of the work that we do.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm going to pop myself in for a couple questions and then turn it back to committee. I really appreciate this presentation. I have this, it's really making me want to visit Alaska. Like, you guys are like the NWT on steroids. We're this tiny little jurisdiction spread out over a huge area, just as big as Alaska, but we've got 30 communities. You've got hundreds. It's just really quite incredible to think about the scale of it and what you're dealing with. One of the questions that came up for me was, in your presentation, it mentions that there's 82 different utilities covered under the PCE program. And so, to give you a bit of context, I mean, the way that we're working up here is we have the one utility, the Northwest Territories Power Corporation, and so that utility does all the different providing of power, but it sounds like it's quite a bit spread out in Alaska. And I had some questions about the renewable project specifically, but maybe I'll start with that. I mean, how is it that there's 82 separate utilities? It sounds like there isn't kind of a crown corporation or a state-run corporation that's generating power for all the various communities of Alaska. Can you help committee understand like how the system works there and how there are so many individual private utilities? Am I mistaken in my understanding there, or?
Well, a couple things. One, we're two and a, obviously Alaska, I always like to say we're 2.5 times the size of Texas, except when the tide's out and we're the third largest. We're 3 times the size of Texas. So in the sense of just due to the geography and the size of Alaska, hence is the reason for many of those utilities. But the majority of the utilities in Alaska are nonprofits. They're co-op, they're member-owned. And so that's a big driver. We do not have any real for-profit, except for one in our state capital. We have municipal-owned, but there's only really one for-profit utility. And we have, like in rural Alaska, there's even fewer than that, in the sense of one we call AVAC, which is Alaska Village Electric Association. They're a co-op. They have about 50 utilities. We have one called Inland Passage down on the what we call the Panhandle, well, obviously close to Canada. In that sense, that those are primarily hydro facilities, and that's how they manage them. But in rural Alaska, we have about 40 that don't have a co-op or don't have a utility tied to them, and those are our challenging communities, because those are the smaller ones, and they usually have 1 or 2 utility operators. But the majority, which you'll find when we say there's 82, that includes the municipality and community-owned utilities. So it's kind of a misnomer. In rural Alaska, there's probably about 4 or 5 utilities, and like I said, there's 40 communities that don't have an association with the utility due to the size of the nature of their community.
Okay, interesting. Thank you so much. Another question that I had was, I'm curious, in your PCE communities and outside of your PCE communities, what's your average, do you measure cost in kilowatt hours the way we do here in Canada? And if so, what is the cost in kilowatt hours, cents per kilowatt hour, in the PCE communities and outside in Alaska?
I guess my question, I don't know how you charge PCE. I don't know how you do that in Canada. So.
Okay. Yeah, this is a bit of a tough question. I mean, I'm
How-
by
how
no
do you-
means.
I'm saying, what's that? Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, you know, if you can help me explain how you divide the cost up per kilowatt hour. And I don't know if we're comparing apples to apples or apples to oranges.
Okay. What I'm asking is just what is the cost per kilowatt hour charged to customers in the PCE communities, and what's the cost per kilowatt hour charged to customers outside of the PCE? Just trying to get an idea of comparing our various costs.
Well, there's as far as, and I think it depends a little bit on the community. The larger utilities, they have a customer charge that is obviously on their bill for charges that are not associated with fuel cost for producing generation. And then we have what we call a COPA, or the cost of power, which is then a separate bill and then combined. And so on the rail belt, that cost is roughly 20 cents a kilowatt, but that includes your cost of power as well as your cost to produce it. Or not your cost to produce it, but your administrative overhead, your infrastructure, your interties. In rural Alaska, it's a little bit different in the sense that the powerhouses are, especially in these rural villages, they're owned by the community or by the co-op, but they don't. But they tend to have the state of Alaska be reliant on replacing their powerhouses and their bulk fuel when needed. And again, it's part of those where the state of Alaska, in our statutes, it says we may, but for the last 40 years, we've taken the moral obligation of shall, replacing powerhouses and bulk fuel in these in our most needed communities. And so it's a little different. We don't have that same approach, obviously, to urban communities, but we do in rural Alaska. When you have 100 or 500 people in a small community, not accessible by road and not accessible by intertie, by any type of transmission or even local distribution from one village and over to the size, then the state has kind of taken on that responsibility. And so those costs aren't really built into their bills, which is an issue that has been a topic of debate for many years here in the state.
Okay, thank you for that answer, and I appreciate committee's indulgence. Do I have further questions from committee members? Okay, seeing none. Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting for me just learning about a completely different jurisdiction that runs very differently from our own, but facing very, very similar challenges. So really appreciate you taking the time to introduce us to this and help us understand how things are going there. I just wanted to say I really appreciated the mission statement that your organization has, and I think people would probably appreciate having something like this in the NWT, that your mission is simply to reduce the cost of energy in Alaska. That's about as simple a statement as it gets to. But I would note that along the way, you're also making huge strides in significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions and use of diesel, because reducing the cost of energy in Alaska goes hand in hand with reducing diesel consumption anyways, so it's as simple as that. With that, we don't have further questions from committee, so Mr. Thayer, I don't know if you have any further thoughts you wanted to share with us, any closing thoughts, but I'll turn it over to you for those.
Well, one thing I will do is I will have my office send you an invitation. The governor hosts what we call a Sustainable Energy Conference in Alaska every year. We're doing it in June this year. We usually have about 1,000 people from all over the world attend. And so it's for, I think, June 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. So I'll send you that invitation. I do know that our Secretary of Energy and our Secretary of Interior will be here. and we actually have representatives from the United Arab Emirates even flying over to be a part of the conversation. So I'll make sure you get an invitation of that. And there's a opportunity to visit Alaska, and we'll see what other ones we can come up with.
We'll see if I can successfully convince committee to allow me to go. But I really appreciate that. And thank you very much. So with that, that does bring this public portion of the committee meeting to a close. And I just wanted to, on behalf of committee and the folks in the Northwest Territories who've tuned in, thank you, Mr. Thayer, for your presentation. It was certainly enlightening for me, and it's really exciting learning about what's going on in Alaska and comparing it to what we've got going on here. We're a much smaller jurisdiction, but as I said, very similar challenges. So it was really eye-opening for me to get a window into the work you guys are doing. So thank you very much for appearing before the committee. This concludes the public portion of the meeting. Thank you for everyone who joined us today. I'll ask committee members, as always, to stay as we go in camera to quickly debrief. So thank you very much, and we will conclude the briefing there.